Hello and welcome to I Know Dino. I'm Garrett.
And I'm Sabrina.
And today, in our 327th episode, we have a bunch of news, including a really crazy article about whether something was gastroliths or gemstones.
Ooh.
Something I would have never expected that would be a controversy. We also have an update on the preparation of that massive block full of multiple Utahraptor individuals. And we have an interview with Rebecca Slater, a.k.a. Jiggy, who's the art director and one of the two founding members of Path of Titans, a really cool upcoming dinosaur video game.
Where you play as a dinosaur.
Yes. And we have Dinosaur of the Day, Zygongosaurus, or maybe Zygongosaurus. Not sure how it got Latinized, but more on that later. Before we get into all of that, we want to thank some of our patrons, and this week we want to thank Stego Steve, Diplodocate, Gabe, Ellen, Callum, Wergersaurus, Ayumi, Daniel McGill, Stefan, and Vikram and Karthik.
Yeah, thank you so much. We appreciate all of your support. And it's because of your support that we're able to do cool things like talk to the creators of Path of Titans and other cool dinosaur things.
Everything's cool.
Yeah.
Speaking of cool things, we're 10 patrons away from our Q&A that we're going to do on YouTube. So if you want to join in on that Q&A action, please join. We'll have it open to everybody, but we're going to start with the patron questions just in case we're short on time. So if you want priority question asking and to help us get to the reward where we do the Q&A, please consider joining the Patreon.
Yep, that's at patreon.com/iknowdino. So I'm going to start today. We've got a really quick update on the Utahraptor Mega Block Fossil Project. It's not too much to say, but I wanted to remind people that it exists, things are happening, and there's a lot of great things in the works. So as of the beginning of this year, they've put in over 3,500 hours into preparing the fossil. That was mostly done by Scott Madsen. I expect there to be many thousands of hours left based on how big this block is and how much is in it.
Yeah, I forget the exact size, but it's many tons, and I think of it as just like a giant cube of rock. It's probably not like a perfect cube shape,
yeah.
But that in my head, that's what it looks like, just a huge block, and then just many layers of Utahraptor all stuck in this giant block.
And iguanodonts. There's at least
really?
2 iguanodonts in there.
Cool.
Yeah. So they're using photogrammetry to make 3D models of the block as it's being prepared.
Ooh, that's just like we were talking about last week. How you can do it as it's going and have an infinite number of versions of your 3D model of the block as it goes.
Exactly. And then you can see, okay, how are these fossils placed? You know, what might that mean? All kinds of things to study later. And you can actually see some of the models on Sketchfab now.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's really handy because when you've got something like this, it's more of a bone bed and you're trying to piece together which animal had which bone, having this perfect photogrammetry model of all of the bones in their exact original position could be really helpful later.
Definitely. So they're working on some papers, probably a lot of papers, and one of them's about an adult Utahraptor brain case.
I'm guessing that's new.
I think it is.
If there's a paper, that's one of the first thing they're publishing on. It must be a unique thing.
Must be pretty well preserved, too.
Oh, yeah.
I expect most things in this block to be well preserved. So yeah, some quick background on the block. It's about 125 million years old. There's at least 1 adult Utahraptor and its brain case. There's 10 juveniles, 3 babies, but the team is saying that they expect to find more than twice that amount of dinosaurs when they're done.
So we're talking about a couple adults, maybe 2 dozen subadults in total.
And some babies.
That is a lot.
And I think they could find feather impressions. So it's possible maybe the Utahraptor were hunting and then they got stuck in quicksand and then that's where they were buried and fossilized.
Sand is a good way to preserve really fine details. Maybe that's why they're thinking there could be some feather impressions in there.
So exciting stuff.
It is. I remember when we interviewed Jim Kirkland about this those years ago, he mentioned that he thought of this as like an ongoing project that might be like multiple lifetimes worth of work to totally prepare and describe everything in it. So I'm not at all holding my breath for this one to get finished in a timely fashion because I know they're being very cautious and very slow. So 3,500 hours of work here might not exactly correlate to 3,500 hours of work on some other just individual dinosaur that's being prepared.
Right.
It's so much harder when you have a bone bed and a really dense thing like this because you don't want to accidentally damage another bone while you're getting to one of these. Like, I think they said there was a skull underneath a bone at one point, and it was really...
And you don't always know what to expect.
Yeah, exactly.
Get it out. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully they have some good scanners, but I mean, you can't CT scan a block like that. You need like some kind of handheld Star Trek type scanning device in order to do it the right way, I guess, or just be really slow about it.
But it's nice that they're making their models available.
Yeah, that's great. The more open access and redundant scans available for everybody, the better. So before we get into the rest of Sabrina's news, I'm going to interrupt and do my heavier news item, which is just crazy. I cannot believe that this is even a thing, but that there's a dinosaur that has what we thought were gastroliths, but may turn out to be gemstones. It's just such a weird thing that you would never imagine. And the authors in multiple points in the paper talk about how, like, this is why you need lots of different branches of science collaborating.
Right, so that you have the eye for it.
Yeah, because like paleontologists, well, they might know something about gemstones, especially if they're the type of paleontologists who focused on geology. They might know a little bit about crystallization and what kind of rocks can appear in different situations. But really, their focus is more on bones and preservations of ichnofossils. Is it possible that these gastroliths could be gemstones? They could be both? Yeah, yes. It's a short answer, but I'll get to that in a little bit because it's really complicated. Okay. It's pretty crazy. But before I get into it too much, I should say the paper was written by Liu Schumann and others, including Alida Bayuel and Jingmei O'Connor, both of whom we've talked to before. And that should give you an idea that this is a Chinese find because they're like the masters of the J-hole biota, basically. Mm-hmm. Although Jingmei is now at the Field Museum. Yeah, so I assume she must have just helped a little bit with this. She's listed as the last author on the paper. Yeah. So maybe she was more of a... Well, since she's done so much research, her name's probably going to appear on lots of papers. Yeah, if you're doing research in the area, right, you want to get her input on it because she probably has an opinion. And it was also published in the Frontiers in Earth Science, which is an open access journal I don't think we've mentioned before, but it's pretty nice. So real quickly, the paper focuses on a specific individual of Bohyornis, which was originally reported with gastroliths, and gastroliths are those gizzard rocks that are used for grinding food. J-hole and other early birds from northeastern China have also been reported with gastroliths, and some appear to have swallowed seeds and rocks together, and presumably that might have made them an herbivore or at least an omnivore, and maybe they were using those rocks to sort of grind up food. Mm-hmm. But J-hole is not an enantiornithine, whereas Bohyornis is, and there aren't any J-hole enantiornithines that have good evidence of gastroliths other than maybe Bohyornis. So it was a pretty important find when they discovered these gastroliths in Bohyornis. Mm-hmm. As a fun fact, because Sabrina took over the fun fact, but I'm going to sneak another one into my news item because that's what I do when she does that. Enantiornithines mean opposite bird. I think we've mentioned that before. Usually, I think of them as being opposite from modern birds because they have teeth, because that's obviously the opposite of a toothless bird is a toothed bird. But that's not at all what the name refers to. What it's really about is the scapula and the coracoid connection point. So in dinosaurs, they have this two separate shoulder blade bones, basically, and they articulate opposite in enantiornithines than they do in other dinosaurs. So basically, they meet at a concave on one side and convex on the other side interaction, and in enantiornithines, the opposite one is concave versus convex. It's a subtle difference, but something that you see in fossils, and a good example of the kind of thing that lets you differentiate a group of animals, because it's not the type of thing that would converge. It's the sort of thing that's in a skeleton, and there's no reason for the dinosaur to sort of switch later with it, so it tends to stick around in the skeleton for a long time. Right. And then you can see it in all these individuals and relate them all back. So it's a pretty handy little feature to look for. if you can spot it. I mean, they're very small bones. In modern birds, these bones are fused into the scapulocoracoid, obviously a portmanteau of scapula and coracoid. And in humans, we don't have a coracoid, but there is a bump that sticks out of our shoulder blade, sort of, so the shoulder blade's in the back. You can feel it if you pat yourself on the back, you're probably patting your shoulder blade. But actually, there's a part of that shoulder blade that sticks forward around your humerus, the upper arm bone, in front of it, sort of making the socket for the humerus.
Mm-hmm.
And that bump sticking out is called the coracoid process.
Oh.
So it's a similar sort of effect of what the coracoid does on other animals, but we don't actually have a coracoid. We just have a bump on our scapula that sort of functions like a coracoid. It's called the coracoid process. And it's where the pectoralis minor attaches. So anyway, that's the scapula and the coracoid and why enantiornithines are called opposite birds. But there's kind of a weird thing that happened with enantiornithines. When it was described as an opposite bird, the original paper didn't say it was because of the scapula and coracoid. So people had different ideas about what they thought was opposite about it. And there's another feature in their bones, which is the order that the bones fuse. They fuse in the opposite direction from modern birds. For example, the bones in the foot fuse from the leg side to the toe side, whereas most of the other dinosaurs fuse from the toe side to the leg side. So there's a couple things that are sort of the opposite from birds. Pretty good name, turns out.
Yeah, it is. So the authors originally only thought of this one aspect of it being the opposite bird, but then it turned out there were a few features.
Yeah, later they clarified that they were talking about the scapula and coracoid, but there were other features too, which maybe is why they didn't specify. I don't know. It was just a weird thing that I found when I was looking into this.
A fun fact.
Yeah. And some of these details about their anatomy maybe weren't ideal because they went extinct 66 million years ago, whereas the non-opposite birds obviously made it to today. But back to Bohyornis. The gastroliths that it had were originally described as wrangle.
What does that mean?
Another new word to me. So that's a specific type of gastroliths in modern raptorial birds, so all the birds of prey. The word, when I looked it up, is most commonly found in falconry, where the people that have the falcons, I guess falconers, feed the birds wrangle so that they can digest their food properly, basically. So it's usually described as sharp gravel. I'm not sure if it's definitively correct, but to me, it's a type of gastrolith. And in this case, I guess a sharper type. And presumably they assumed that it may have been like a raptor in that it was eating the same kind of gastrolith. There have been discussions in the past about how maybe the shape of the gastroliths that a dinosaur chose might tell you something about its diet. So I guess maybe smoother ones would be more herbivorous, whereas these sharper ones might be for predators.
Yeah, when I think gastroliths, I usually think smooth.
Yeah.
And I also think sauropods.
Yeah. But then we've also seen some papers where it's like they might not have selected them that much, and they get rounded out really quickly in the gut anyway. So I don't know. I think this is still an area that needs a lot of research. But in this case, the thing that they were looking at was whether or not they were any type of gastrolith at all, or if they were a gemstone that formed during fossilization in an area sort of near where the stomach might have been.
So after the animal died, then there was something around it, and maybe these gemstones formed, and it looked like it was in its gut contents.
Exactly, yeah. It's not like it ate gemstones. Like, did it have wrangle, rounded gastroliths, or gemstones?
It had an eye for shiny objects.
Yeah, exactly. Although I have seen reports of people's pet chickens, like eating diamond earrings and things like that if they drop them in a chicken coop. So they might have, I guess there's probably some dinosaur that ate a gemstone.
Yeah, some birds decorate their nests with shiny objects.
That's a good point. Yeah, there's that aspect to it too. So the gemstones that they found in it are referred to as cryptocrystalline, which is called cryptocrystalline because the structure is made up of tiny crystals that are very difficult to identify as crystalline. And it can even be difficult to pick them out as a crystal microscopically.
So it makes sense then that there was this confusion.
Yes. And so, yeah, debating whether this thing is a rock or something that's largely a rock, but technically a crystal on the inside, sort of surrounded by rock, think of something like a geode, basically, is pretty difficult to figure out. But in this case, after they sliced into it, did a bunch of different chemical analyses, looked at it under microscopes and looked at it under polarized light, everything they could throw at it, they came up with it is probably a cryptocrystalline, and specifically a chalcedony, which is a type of silicon dioxide rock mixture. And if you go to Wikipedia and look up chalcedony, which is spelled like chalcedony, C-H-A-L-C, but it's been pronounced Chalca, I guess. But on Wikipedia, it looks just like the Bohai-Ornis specimen. There's just one picture of it, and like if you put it next to the Bohai-Ornis gut contents, it's like, yeah, that looks really similar. I could see how that would probably be the same thing. And chalcedony is a pretty cool mineral. It can be nearly any color depending on the exact chemistry. That's pretty common with silicon dioxide. There's also, it's like quartz. You can get quartz in a million different ways. They have a bunch of different names, like amethyst is a type of quartz, which is purple.
Rose
that has
quartz.
the right inclusions. Oh, I didn't even know that one. Is that pink, I'm guessing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know you can get yellow, and I'm pretty sure you can get blue and green, basically anything, depending on the exact chemistry. And it's really common because silicon dioxide is the main component of sand and glass. There's just tons of silicon and oxygen all over the earth. So you get this kind of stuff all over the place. It also includes agate and onyx. Those are two types of chalcedony specifically, not just a type of quartz. And the chemistry showed that this gastrolith / gemstone area was mostly silicon, oxygen, and carbon, which would make you think, yeah, it could be chalcedony. In addition, when they did the thin section under polarized light, it showed a pretty consistent crystalline-looking structure, so that helped them identify it as a crystal and not just as an amorphous rock. There's one other element that made it seem like it was more likely to be a gemstone than it was to be a gastrolith, or at the very least, that it wasn't a complete picture of gastroliths that this dinosaur swallowed. And that's because usually gastroliths are roughly 3% of the body mass of a dinosaur or bird of this size.
That sounds like a lot.
It does sound like a lot, but when you're talking about mass, it's not volume, and rocks are really dense, and then birds have very light skeletons too, and
True.
They're built for flying, right? So they're saving weight all over the rest of their body, but they can't find lightweight rocks. Unless, I guess, crystals are probably lighter weight. But anyway, Bohai-Ornis is large for an enantiornithine. It actually weighed about 300 grams, or 2/3 of a pound. So talking about a pretty big bird, or bird-like creature.
Pretty big opposite bird.
Yeah. And based on those numbers, you'd expect it to have about 10 grams of gastrolith, but they couldn't remove this chalcedony / gastrolith to weigh it. So what they did instead was they got a 3-gram piece of silicon dioxide and put it next to it and just sort of roughly compared the size. And the 3-gram piece of silicon dioxide is just incredibly massive next to it. It looks like it's 100 to 1,000 times the size of the whole mass of supposed gizzard stones.
Wow.
So yeah, it looks like, and that would only be 1% of the body mass, not 3%. So even on the conservative side, it's like, this is not nearly enough gastrolith, and it's not exactly in the right spot either for where a stomach might have been. So you combine all of that, it looks like it's probably more likely to be some sort of cryptocrystalline rock and not gastroliths that were preserved inside the body. Back to your earlier question about how they formed and if it could be some combination of the dinosaur in some way and its living information about when it was alive and something that's fossilized. It turns out that cryptocrystalline rock often is formed from soft tissues in a process known as orthogenesis.
Oh. So it benefited from the animal.
The crystal benefited from the animal?
Yeah. It was able to form from the soft tissues.
I guess. I never think about crystals benefiting, but I guess if you're giving it agency, then
I guess, yeah. I mean, it's probably not thinking about it that way, but it just happened.
Yes. So the authors couldn't specifically say if this was formed from the soft tissue, but it's possible because there is quite a bit of carbon. Like I said, it's not just silicon dioxide, that was, soft tissue is made largely of carbon. And it's possible that the carbon that's included in the crystals was originally the soft tissue of the dinosaur. And then the crystal sort of formed around those points. Because if you think about, if you've ever grown crystals like sugar crystals or something, you put the little rope in it and it forms around the rope. And that's what they're saying with this. Maybe there was little bits of skin or whatever that were still around while it was buried. And this could be thousands of years later, really, at that point. And the crystals started to form around that. So it could have some information about Bohaiornis in this sort of structure. Maybe the shape is important in some way and it's preserving some detail, but it's nothing obvious. The authors couldn't come up with anything that they could really learn from it. And they didn't say this in the paper, but I think it's worth pointing out that it could have come from other plants or animal matter. Carbon
Right.
doesn't have to be from Bohaiornis.
Right. It's not the only soft tissue around.
Yeah. It could be gut contents that turned into this, or it could be a leaf that was nearby that drifted over during the fossilization process, or anything. It could be dirt. Nobody knows. At least not yet. Maybe we'll figure it out later. But there is one possible upside that we could learn, even if we can't figure out what exactly the Chalcedony is made from, if it's skin or if it's gut contents or if it's something else entirely. It might give us some information about the conditions as it fossilized, because different crystals form in different ways depending on temperature and pressure and details like that. So we might be able to figure out exactly how this Bohaiornis sort of became a fossil by looking at the crystals. Maybe. Something the authors threw out there, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, it is.
And I think you could, if you find this kind of thing in other dinosaurs, it might be able to help connect them in some way.
Yeah, connect those opposite birds.
Yep.
So in other news, in Pennsylvania in the U.S., the Philadelphia Zoo is getting some animatronic dinosaurs because it's part of their exhibit Big Time, Life in an Endangerous Age.
Endangerous?
Yeah, I like the Big Time. Some big dinosaurs in that Big Time. Anyway, they've got 24 animatronic animals. They're not all dinosaurs. They've also got like a woolly mammoth and a saber-toothed tiger. It does have the T-Rex, Triceratops, Pachycephalosaurus, and Alamosaurus. And the reason they have all these different types of animals is because they've got different landscapes. So there's an area with exploding volcanoes. You can see Earth just after the asteroid. You also see prehistoric Australia, Madagascar, North America. And it sounds like you're walking through different periods of time. So the exhibit opens March 29th and it runs through September 30th. You do have to get tickets in advance and wear masks.
Makes sense. That reminds me, when you mentioned the asteroid, I saw a news article, I didn't cover it here, but it was about whether the impactor was a comet. Maybe it was a piece of a comet rather than an asteroid. Mm-hmm. And then I immediately regretted my decision to stop calling it the impactor, because I used to generically say impactor all the time because we didn't know what it was.
Right.
It could have been anything. We just know that it slammed into Earth. But maybe now I'm going to have to go back to saying impactor rather than asteroid, because it could be comet.
Right.
Comet fragment doesn't roll off the tongue the same way asteroid does.
But impactor.
Yeah.
Still has that impact.
Heyo.
Got a couple quick game items. So an unreleased Nintendo 64 game called Dinosaur Planet has now been released in a way. It originally was turned into Star Fox Adventures for GameCube.
Oh, interesting.
So this was a while ago. But then Forest of Illusion, they bought a disc with a build of the game from a private game collector in Sweden. And this builds from December 1st, 2000. And they preserved it. So now you can download the file from Internet Archive. Apparently it doesn't run 100% perfectly on all emulators, but it should work with flashcards.
That's really interesting. I think that Star Fox game was kind of a weird one where you played as a character. You weren't in a spaceship like you are in most Star Fox things. Like you were just kind of running around. So I guess they just turned the dinosaurs into Star Fox. They figured that branding was better.
Yeah. I don't know the whole story of why, but that's how it sounded.
Looking at it, looks like you might play as some kind of fox creature. And then there's like other dinosaurs around. It's really interesting.
And then another bit of gaming news. I came across this funny headline on The Gamer. It said, quote, in a move that shocked even the devs, one No Man's Sky player has managed to hatch a massive dinosaur in the new Companions update. So apparently somebody bred a species from a companion egg and that hatched into a green sauropod-like animal.
Hmm.
And I say sauropod-like because it looks like a sauropod, but it's also got these spiky fins on its back.
Is it like a Margosaurus or is it even more like a Stegosaurus situation?
Neither. It's like how I would draw a fantastical sea creature kind of thing.
Oh, they look kind of like they're on its neck, like the underside of its neck. Oh, wait, that's a different thing. Those are like weird fungus discs. Yeah, that's a creepy... Calling that a sauropod is, like, I guess.
Sauropod-like.
Yeah, sort of convergent evolution, sort of.
It looks like a dinosaur-ish.
In a bird-type way. It's like if you crossed a Saurischian with an Ornithischian. You get like a long neck, but like a more bird-like head and a long tail and a big body.
Yeah. There might be even more dinosaur-looking creatures out there in the game now, because apparently soon after this one, people shared other species they'd hatched, which were even bigger than this one.
Oh, okay. So that whatever this update is caused more dinosaur-like creatures to come into the game. Well, that's good. I'm in support of any updates that add dinosaurs to games.
Yeah, me too. And now on to our interview with Rebecca Slater from Path of Titans.
We are joined this week by Rebecca Slater, also known as Jiggy, who is the art director at Path of Titans, this awesome dinosaur game that you may be familiar with. And she's also one of the two original, basically, creators of the game. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Cool. So, I mean, it's we've seen a lot about this game already. And I guess I'd like to start by just hearing about why you created Path of Titans.
What inspired it?
Yeah, it's basically a childhood dream of mine. And what I mean by that is growing up in sort of the 90s and kind of early 2000s, there never were any good dinosaur video games that let you actually be the dinosaur and run around in the ecosystem and hunt other dinosaurs and things like that. There were similar ideas like Spore let you create little creatures and run around and stuff, but it was just coincidental that you could make a creature look like a dinosaur. There were some games that let you hunt dinosaurs with guns and crossbows and stuff, and those were great, but never were there games that let you be the dinosaur in the ecosystem and kind of almost like role play as the dinosaur. Because they let you role play as knights and sorcerers and things like that, but never as animals. And so my thought here was, I've had this passion for so long, I can't be alone. And every time I talk to a friend saying, hey, you like dinosaurs, what would you think about a dinosaur game? They always loved the idea. And, looking back at that, once I think of, hey, all of the kids are growing up today, they probably would love something similar. My thought is just make that game. Make that game. At least kids who are growing up who are super into dinosaurs, because sometimes people grow out of it. None of us here, of course, but sometimes kids will grow out of it. If they could have a really kick-ass dinosaur game that they could play, they probably would never lose interest in dinosaurs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Make the dinosaur phase go extinct.
Also a great way to bring people back into their dinosaur phase.
That's true, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, there's so many cool things to explore when it comes to video games and dinosaurs, like all these different attacks and the environments and species and subspecies and all this crazy stuff. There's just so many cool gameplay elements. And I just think what we're doing with Path of Titans, there's just some great gameplay loops and fun times to be had just being a dinosaur. Never mind the veneer of dinosaur over top. You can actually get some pretty awesome gameplay content coming out of that as well,
Yeah.
But yeah.
I'm glad you made a game because you mentioned how, there are a lot of games where basically you can fight and shoot dinosaurs and stuff. I feel like that's all there was when I was a kid. Like there was Turok and stuff like that. Like if I wanted a game with dinosaurs, my only option was to kill the dinosaur. Like I want to be nice to I like the dinosaur.
At least let me ride the dinosaur,
something. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, and there's dinosaur movies like the Walking with Dinosaurs movies and some of these like that, but there's something about physically being able to interact with them and control them that has like its own element to it. Like watching them is great, but being there, controlling it, interacting with them in like a live media is very, very important in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's cool too how you put so much personality into the different dinosaurs. So it's like when you're playing as, say, a Spinosaurus versus a Deinonychus, it's a very different experience, and you're like, oh, I'm so fast in the water but so slow on land, or vice versa, and like you
have to play up the differences between the dinosaurs, and specifically what we're trying to do in the game is, understandably the point of the game is to do quests and survive, and something like a Deinonychus can't really take down a Spinosaurus. Nevertheless, they didn't live at the same time period, of course, but like they probably can't take one down, at least a single Deinonychus. And so the idea is, what can I do to make the Deinonychus, this little feathered raptor, more interesting to play than the Spinosaurus in some aspects? So he's going to be really good at jumping and exploring and running fast. He's really good at team play, like taking down, like latching onto dinosaurs and taking them down. So like having a group of friends and stuff like that. And Spinosaurus is going to be great for a kind of more solo player who can feed himself by catching fish and is really big and bulky, but really slow, very small legs. You're not walking anywhere fast on land. So it's just kind of different play styles. So every dinosaur will be relevant in some way, assuming that's your preferred play style. So that's kind of the way we're doing it. Because otherwise, if it was just about PvP, I don't know, you just have everyone would pick T-Rex or Spinosaurus or maybe the biggest herbivore. And, it just kind of, it's not really the goal of the game is to make the best PvP dinosaur. That's kind of what the direction we've been taking with Path of Titans.
Yeah, I instinctively picked Spinosaurus the first time I played it. And I dove in the lake and immediately caught a fish. And then I was like, let's explore some land. And you take like 50 steps and then he needs to lie down, take a break so that he can, walk quickly again. I was like, okay, let's try another dinosaur. Then I think I was Deinonychus, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Deinonychus gets fall damage, does it?
Not really, no. He can go anywhere he wants, basically. Jumps really high, too.
He kind of glides, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so cool. I like scampering around, just running all over the place. The little Deinonychus is so fun. Cool. So you mentioned quests. What kind of quests? Have you already rolled out quests, or is this a future thing that you're going to add?
So we have current quests right now. They're really simple. They're mostly just for testing. So things like, collect some mushrooms or collect some nuts, stuff like that, right? But in the future, we'll have a lot more involved quests. So things like, hey, grab this quest item and deliver it somewhere else, for example. And the types of quests we're trying to do are, it is a game, so they'll be a little more gamey, but we're trying to make them within the realm of realism. It's not like you're grabbing some secret, glowy treasure chest and then bringing it over to this place. This would be something like, hey, maybe you've got a dinosaur graveyard and it's going to ask you, hey, go and find some bones from a kill or from another corpse and bring the bones to the graveyard, like kind of like paying your respects. So just kind of like a little bit out there, but enough to make it seem like there's lots of interesting tasks to do that don't necessarily, they're not like outside, like, elephant graveyards and things like that. So it's kind of like a similar idea. Hey, no quests like, hey, the water in this area is quite dirty. Try and clean it up so you can drink from it, so you actually have a water source. Or, hey, looks like all the predators trashed your berry bushes. How about you go and get some mulch and like replenish the bush and stuff like that. Just kind of like, it's not quite accurate at things like that, but at the end of the day, it's a game. There's got to be some fun stuff to do. And like managing your own resources and things like that as well. And of course, cool quests like, hey, as a Deinonychus, try and take down like a Ceratosaurus. Like that's going to be kind of hard. You're going to need some friends. It's going to be a group quest, so you can share your progress across friends and things. So just having stuff to do, because if there was no quests in the game and it was purely just surviving, unfortunately, that's really easy to do. If just surviving, you'd be able to hide in a bush, and it's just we want to encourage players to run around, doing different things, try different characters, unlock different things. Just have a bit more of a loop, a fun loop going on there.
Yeah.
Cool. So does that mean that there are like AI predators and maybe herbivores roaming around these worlds as well?
While not yet implemented, that is absolutely the plan. So things like having herds of herbivores maybe small Camptosaurus or something like that, and Struthia mimus, that would be able to populate it for some of the smaller carnivores. Sometimes there might be a giant T-Rex AI running around and causing throwing a tantrum and trying to like attack anything in sight. So just using the AI, you can kind of balance out the ecosystem. If every player on the map decided to choose Tyrannosaurus, let's say, because it's really popular, we'd be able to actually balance out the ecosystem, having Camptosaurus or Hadrosaurus or something for the Tyrannosauruses to go for.
Yeah, that's really cool. So I kind of want to go through some of the dinosaurs. Do you have a favorite dinosaur that you've made so far in the game?
My favorite dinosaur is usually the one that I last created.
Oh yeah, I know what you mean.
You're like, man, I really like the way I did this dinosaur, this skin. And then the moment I make a next dinosaur, it's like, oh, I really like this one now. This one's really scratching that itch for me. So, but in terms of like when I'm actually playing the game, I probably like playing the Ceratopsians just because I like how they've got like all business in the front, and you can pivot and turn on the spot, and eventually they'll have their like charge attacks, so you can really run in and bowl people over because push them around. So I think I'm probably like playing those guys quite a bit.
Cool.
Yeah.
And then the most recent one you've made, is that Stegosaurus?
The update?
Yeah, Stegosaurus.
Cool. Why'd you decide to update it?
Oh, right. So I had created the Stegosaurus 2 years ago at this point. First modeled it, first retopologized it, got it ready in the game. And when I created it, I was looking at Scott Hartman's skeletal reference for it. Scott Hartman is a very, very good, well, he's a scientist that makes some amazing skeletal restorations of many, many dinosaurs. And he's very, very important to my work, sort of referencing many other skeletal diagrams of other people. Because while I have made my own skeletal diagrams, it's good to like see what other people are doing. And while I did reference that Stegosaurus skeletal diagram, at the time, I didn't realize just how important it was going to be to stick to the exact proportions. And coming back to it now, today, and I look at it and I go, his head's too large, his eyes are too large, his feet aren't great, his tail, this, like all of these things. And they might not make a huge difference in terms of like gameplay or things, but small things like proportions really do kind of define the look of the dinosaur.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the feet are really important too.
Yeah, like with Archosaurus, they have like certain number of toenails, and then they have got the two extra little digits. At least in Stegosaurus, they have like almost like their pinky and their ring finger, so to speak, has no nails on it, and it's actually they're quite small. So definitely those things are part of it too, if you really want to go for the minutia, the details. But especially just getting those proportions right, like he was quite thin. Stegosaurus are known to be actually quite bulky, quite wide. So I widened him up and I reanimated some of his animations to try and give him more of a, like a proud look with like his neck kind of raised up and things like that. And really it was just going back and looking at my old work from 2 years ago and realizing just how much I've improved and wanting to try and keep all of the dinosaurs in our game on a consistent scale of quality and accuracy.
Yeah, it looks really good. And speaking of attention to detail, because one of them, not latest, because the Stegosaurus was the latest update, but a recent update was called meat chunk updates. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the meat chunk update, basically we had our dinosaurs and they were able to eat from a corpse. So you've killed maybe an iguanodon or something, and they're laying there and you can eat from it, and there's a little chunk that spawns in your mouth. But if you want to, you can pick up a chunk of meat and bring it with you. So you kind of have a source of food that you can bring with you, and when your hunger drops below a certain point, you can go ahead and eat it. So it's kind of like a way to bring the body along with you without having to actually sit around the corpse, because the sitting around the corpse is going to attract probably bigger dinosaurs who are going to try and bully you off your kill.
Gotcha. Speaking of bigger dinosaurs, so is T-Rex playable, or is that going to be like an AI only situation?
So T-Rex will be playable. It's not in the game right now. It's not even modeled or anything yet. That's something that we're going to be adding probably after the game is launched, which will be a little while from now. And we understand that Tyrannosaurus is probably like the number one spotlight creature. Everybody loves T-Rex. And some people might, like some of our community sometimes concerned, like, hey, if you add T-Rex, nobody's going to play anything else. It's going to overshadow all of the other dinosaurs and things like that. And sometimes people are also worried that like I might make it just look like the Jurassic Park T-Rex or something.
Mm-hmm.
And while the Jurassic Park T-Rex looks amazing, it's not quite accurate to what we know today. So when I do the T-Rex and when the T-Rex is added, it'll always be with like accuracy in mind.
Mhm.
Make it look unique from other Tyrannosaurs, but certainly just make sure that it looks as though people are playing an animal and not this terrible, creature running around like a kaiju and squashing everything, right?
Yeah.
So even though T-Rex isn't in right now, I know that when he is added, people will like him, but it's not like they'll be able to stomp around, cause havoc, and sort of ruin the game for everyone else, right? Like it's really going to be a natural thing. It's sort of like how if Daspletosaurus, which is one of the Tyrannosaurs that we will be adding, when it is added to the game, it's going to be, it's quite small. Many people like playing him, but it's not really going to disrupt our ecosystem to the point that people might be worried about.
When you're designing these dinosaurs, because I know sometimes, especially like thinking about T-Rex, there's still a lot of these debates over just how it looked. So like as the artist, and when you're thinking of this, but also trying to stay as scientifically accurate as possible, kind of like where do you draw the line or how do you make certain decisions?
So when it comes to like the integument of the creature, so the scales, the feathers, quills, things like that, we have a system in game that lets you switch between, we call them subspecies, but they're actually species. I think most average players, they don't realize that when they call a species of dinosaurs is actually referring to the genus.
Mm-hmm.
So like Allosaurus is a genus actually, not a species. It's Fragilis, which is the species. So we just call them subspecies so people don't get so confused. They're technically species. So you have like Allosaurus, let's say, and between the three subspecies that we have for him, we're able to change up any of, like we could change the mesh around to give him different proportions. We could add quills or things like that. Maybe not so much for Allosaurus, but for something like Albertoceratops, you're able to change between species to like add or like different horn shapes or quills on his bum or things like that. And that gives us a lot of freedom to basically design the dinosaur, but also design like alternate versions of the dinosaur. Like I know there's a lot of debate about the shape of the Spinosaurus sail, whether it's more like an M shape or a half circle or a rectangular shape or something like that. And so because the science is changing all the time with new discoveries, my thought here when designing those subspecies is, hey, let's try and cover all the bases and figure out like all of the possible reconstructions for these things. Like with Spinosaurus, he's got the tail fluke and he's got the sail shape and things like that. And I can kind of just go, hey, 3 subspecies, 3 different shapes, pick the one that you prefer to play. And if you really want to go 100% for accuracy or what's the most accurate representation in the game, you can go ahead and pick that. But if you want to try something a bit different, you've got like a round sail, for example. So when it comes to actually designing the creatures, though, we try and do when I'm doing it. If it's feathered, absolutely going for feathers. So like Deinonychus, Latanovenatrix. Eventually, we'll be adding a Kilobator or a Kilobator. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it. And so that one will have feathers as well. Alioramus is another. It's kind of like a Tyrannosaur, I think, and that one's got a cape of feathers on its back. So definitely not shy to be doing the feathers on the dinosaurs. Struthiomimus, feathers as well. And when it comes to the scaled dinosaurs, I try and give them some kind of interesting feature scales. So maybe a row of scoots going down their back to try and break it up. The thought here is if you're looking at a Styracosaurus from behind and an Albertoceratops from behind and an Eotriceratops from behind, you kind of want to be, they're all kind of looking the same. Most of the ceratopsians, it was their head that had something unique about them and their bodies were usually quite similar. So I always try to, something on their body, and if you looked at their body, you'd be able to tell what dinosaur that was, regardless of the size. So Albertoceratops has like a row of scoots going down its back. Styracosaurus has little like bumps, I guess, going down its back too. And Eotriceratops has the kind of hexagonal, larger scoots that I think the ceratopsians are kind of known for.
Cool. Yeah, that's a good idea because otherwise you're just looking at a bunch of brown, wide backs walking around.
Especially with like the growth stages. So for something like Eotriceratops, even though you might be able to easily discern it from its size, it's quite a bit larger than Albertoceratops, you'd be able to tell visually what it looks like, because once you've got a small Eotriceratops, so a subadult teenager-sized Eotriceratops, that's actually going to be the same size as an Albertoceratops probably at that point, right?
Mm.
So being able to just tell them visually all apart, and also with their skins and things like that as well, because there's so many different colors and patterns that we can use. And then, of course, the players have the ability to change up the colors if they like as well. Yeah, it just gives people a lot of customization options, and further customize with the subspecies and pick the one that seems most interesting to you.
Yeah.
But yeah, so one thing about Path of Titans that's really important actually is the fact that we provide modding tools and modding documentation and being able to host your own server with mods and stuff like that. So Path of Titans is kind of just like a base for a dinosaur sandbox tool, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
Because what we're interested in doing is, I personally think that a really good dinosaur game would be like quests and kind of MMO, right?
Mhm.
But I don't necessarily like, a lot of people also really think that a pure realism type of game would be amazing too. Or like everyone's got different ideas about what would make a really amazing dinosaur game. And I'm not going to be like ignorant and think that my idea is the best for everyone. I certainly hope that people enjoy the game will bring them. But I also want to provide people say, hey, if you really don't like the way I balance the stats on this T-Rex here, you can go in and modify them and just change them as a mod, and it's perfectly fine. And we'll allow other people to download them, that you just upload your mod to our site. If you want to add Pachyrhinosaurus or like dragons or wolves or like anything crazy you want, you can add it into the game with modding and then upload it to our site, and people can download it to their game, and it's like a whole integrated system of user-generated content.
Cool.
And another one that I'm very interested in terms of game mode, interested to see what people are going to do. In the game, we're calling it the creator mode. And if you've ever played Dungeons and Dragons, you probably know there's the Dungeon Master.
Mhm.
And they have the ability to like say when certain monsters are coming in, and you kind of, I guess, like create the quest line of where your players are following, and you can dictate the scenery and plop down a monster in the middle of your path and things like that. And the creator game mode is something we'll be working on. This will be after release. But basically, it'll give you Dungeon Master style control over the people on your server. So you'll fly around and you can see what they're doing and you can see what they're saying. And you could like spawn a T-Rex like between the rocky, craggy path that your party is trying to traverse down, and then jump into control of the T-Rex and go and start, rampaging after the people, chasing them around, kind of like Aladar from the dinosaur movie and the Carnotaurs.
Mhm.
If you remember that one, you could kind of have people do that. And then you can hop out of that one and spawn another T-Rex behind them, and whatever it is you want to do. And you can kind of create your own journeys with your friends and be a dungeon master for them. So, because I know a lot of people who are into dinosaurs really like the role-playing element of it too. And it could be, of course, related to a big server community event. If you got like 150 people on your server, you could do some kind of cool event like, hey, this is going to be, Carnivore Madness Saturday or something. And, everyone's got to be a Camptosaurus and survive. And I'm going to send all of these T-Rexes after you. And, just things like that, right? It just gives people the freedom to really do whatever they're interested in. It could be crazy. It could be more in the realm of realism, whatever people like.
Yeah.
That sounds really fun.
That does sound fun. I hope someone does that exact scenario.
Everybody be a Camptosaurus and nothing
Survive,
but T-Rex
yeah.
around you.
With that, you could probably make like a battle royale type game mode if you really wanted to, where you start as a T-Rexes and the ring around the map slowly closes as everyone starts fighting.
Oh man, last Camptosaurus left standing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like at this point too, you're so familiar with, I guess, just dinosaurs and how they might look and stuff. With Spinosaurus, one of the subspecies, it's got that, was it the paddle-like tail? And you actually designed that before that paper came out.
Yeah, it was, I was looking at Spinosaurus and I went, all right, so he's aquatic. He's got a really long tail. He's got a sail. He's got the whole thing. If he's going to be paddling, he's got really small legs, or short legs, I should say.
Mhm.
And it just made sense to me. Like, I think there needs to be a paddle on this tail because it just makes sense. And it was kind of an out there thing. And at the time when I made it, I got a bit of criticism from some of our players thinking, hey, it's not quite so accurate. And I said, don't worry, there's going to be a subspecies that doesn't have it. Don't worry about that. It'll just be a nice smooth tail, like what's accurate. And lo and behold, about 8-9 months later, the pretty famous now paper came out that implies, or that has discovered that Spinosaurus has kind of like a tadpole tail, or eel-like tail. And I was just like, man, I called it.
Yeah.
Something about it it seemed off balance. It was totally just a feeling. But it ended up being really right, which is great because it doesn't mean I don't have to remodel our Spinosaurus.
Yeah, that's cool. I also like, from a gameplay standpoint, even if, say, it turns out Spinosaurus couldn't swim super well and all that kind of stuff, you kind of need a dinosaur to be able, how else are you going to differentiate a T-Rex from a Spinosaurus, from a, Ceratosaurus, and like all these things. In a gameplay standpoint, it's nice to have that balancing where one of them is more aquatic. So I like that element of it.
Yeah, we definitely try and exaggerate that a bit. Like, Spinosaurus probably could walk not too terribly on land, right? If he has legs still, he's probably walking on land, evolutionary speaking. And so, the thought here was, even though he could probably walk pretty fast, I'm going to dial it back and keep him slow, specifically because I want to encourage Spinosaurus to stay in their lake. And that's like, defend their lake. Don't let people overfish their lake. That's their food source. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. I also want to ask, there's a couple more dinosaurs that we haven't talked about yet. You have a sauropod eventually coming to the game, a Margosaurus. Do you have any thoughts about what a Margosaurus is going to be like in the game?
Sauropods are so difficult, and they are so big. You're trying to walk in the forest, and you're too wide and stuck in a tree, and your head's and you can't see anything, and there's trees. So the thought here was, I'm not going to pretend that we'll be able to get something like Pegatotitan, I think.
Patagotitan, yeah.
This giant sauropod, or like a brachiosaur type sauropod or anything like that. So what we're trying to do for this game is I really want to do sauropods. We're going to do smaller sauropods. So our Margosaurus is like arguably like about the size, a little smaller than T-Rex or something like that, right? And the thought here was, if we can make T-Rex fit in the game, then our Margosaurus could fit in the game. And it's a really interesting dinosaur because of the neck spines.
Oh, yeah.
And I know there was a relative of that discovered actually fairly recently, Bajatosaurus, I think, where the spines on the neck are actually facing forward.
Yeah.
And one of my thoughts here is, if I do our Margosaurus, I'm very interested in making a subspecies that has them point forward a bit too. even though it's a different dinosaur entirely, I think it would be super cool. So the thoughts here with our Margosaurus in general, though, is it'll be like kind of slower, has its whip-like tail, has the spines in the front. It's going to be quite an interesting dinosaur to play as, because very few games let you play as a sauropod because they just go, hey, it's going to be too big and too slow. Sorry, I can't do it. So I'm really interested in trying to make it work out.
Yeah, cool. One more dinosaur I want to ask you about. There's Microraptor. What do you think, like, fitting into the scheme of...
Well, will it be able to glide?
Yes, it will glide. It can climb trees. It's going to be really, really small.
Mm-hmm.
That's another thing to consider, is balancing the game between a giant Tyrannosaurus and a Microraptor, right?
Yeah.
So that's definitely a very interesting gameplay design to get around. Like, most games, all of the characters are about the same size. So it's very difficult to try and balance these things. Like, how does a T-Rex fight a Microraptor?
Does it even notice it?
Yeah, it's just so small. It's climbing a tree. It's just making some screeching sounds at the T-Rex. T-Rex says, I don't have enough time to try and hunt that thing. I'm going to starve soon. I need to go and find something bigger and more like substantial to eat. So, yeah, in terms of like the gameplay for Microraptor, because it's a little further out, that's something like we'll add after the game is released as kind of like a stretch goal dinosaur, like you said. It's a little hard for me to specifically pinpoint what the gameplay is going to be like, but one thing I'm very interested in trying out, no guarantees here, but I'd love to play around with the idea of Microraptor being like the troll dinosaur. And what I mean by that is it's like a trickster, and it can make dinosaur calls of creatures that it's heard before, so you could hear like a Microraptor makes a T-Rex sound
Oh,
and
that'd
kind
be
of
amazing.
scares people and stuff like that. And it can fly around, and it probably can't get hit by people. Like if it's on the ground trying to eat something, all right, fair game, but probably it's climbed up a tree, gliding around, trolling people, and it can't really hurt anybody. Maybe
Yeah.
it could peck a Deinonychus, maybe, but it's not going to really be killing anything. It's going to be more of a scavenger.
More confusing and
things
annoying,
like
the
that.
other dinosaurs.
So I love the idea of if people just want to bug other people, they go and play Microraptor.
Yeah, if you do that, that would probably be the one I play the most.
Oh, Sabrina. Yeah, that's a really good solution because otherwise it seems like Microraptor would just be totally not even in the same world. It would be like a world within a world. Microraptor would be like hunting bugs and climbing trees, doing something completely unrelated to everybody else playing the game, unless you add some element, like you're saying, where it's sort of the troll. That's really clever.
Yeah, it's difficult trying to think of how do I make all of these completely different animals interact with one another in a meaningful way. I don't know, one thing we added, we were thinking about it from a gameplay design thing. Let's say you've got dinosaurs and they're in this big herd, all Lambeosaurus or something like that in a big herd. That's great. And if you're not able to invite, let's say, a Camptosaurus, Albertoceratops, Kentrosaurus, if you can't invite any of those types of dinosaurs to your party and make a herd with them, you're kind of restricted in if there's other Lambeosaurus players or AI on the map, right? And it starts getting difficult because we've got like 20 dinosaurs now, and we'll be adding even more, and there'll be modded dinosaurs, and you can tell that people are just going to cram as many dinosaurs as possible into this game from a community standpoint and from like development standpoint, right?
Yeah.
And so one difficult decision we had to make that kind of goes against realism and is more into the gameplay thing is we let basically any herbivores or any carnivores go into a group together and like play together. So you're kind of like mixing species, mixing the pack up, And it was difficult to make the decision. Like I said, it's just it's not really realistic to have like a Deinonychus and a Tyrannosaurus in a group together, hunting. But when you think about it from a gameplay design perspective, our thought here was the Deinonychus is faster than the T-Rex. And the Deinonychus could like scout ahead and tell the T-Rex, hey, found some guys over here, come on over. And the T-Rex slowly lumbers on over. And the T-Rex tries to ambush them. And, the Deinonychus can try and herd them towards the T-Rex. And, so you've got like an actual group, kind of not quite the same as like tank, healer, DPS. Not quite the same as that, but like a thing like fast and exploration, slow and bulky. You've got dinosaurs that can do calls that will give buffs to people. You got dinosaurs that have venom, speculative venom here, but venom and bleeding, so you can apply status effects. So you kind of everyone gets to pick the dinosaur they want to play as instead of everyone having to pick one dinosaur, and they all have strengths and weaknesses. So when it comes to PvP, there's actually a bit of a balancing act you can do with your friends here.
Yeah, or you could, I was just thinking of Land Before Time, you could get a group of friends and each play a dinosaur similar to like one of the ones in Land Before Time.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And you'll all be baby dinosaurs too, so it'll be great.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I like that. It also kind of solves the problem of you're a baby and how do you'd have to be protected by the same species. But if you can go in a herd that's already existing and get a little protection that way, that sounds good. When you have the carnivore herd, though, are they going to just eat each other a lot of the time, I feel like?
They could do. I mean, part of the gameplay is, I see a Deinonychus there. Is he worth more to being alive and like being a scout for me? And like maybe once he scouts out a dinosaur, I'll just eat him, So like, there's nothing stopping people from doing that, like using other people as tools for their, survival. So absolutely, that's what we're going to be encouraging too. Like it's a dinosaur eat dinosaur world out there.
That does make Microraptor seem appealing because the calculus on that is probably, well, they're better at scouting ahead and things and not worth eating. Cool. I like it a lot. I'm excited.
So for our listeners, if they haven't already checked you guys out, like where's the best place for them to find out like more information about Path of Titans or keep up to date on all your updates?
Yeah, so just pathoftitans.com. That's our just website and things like that. And we have discord.paththetitans.com, so you can go ahead and join our Discord if you want to have like more up-to-date and like hour-to-hour updates with the game and what's going on and interact with the community, things like that. We always make big announcements there first so people can get a head start on their downloads and updates and stuff like that. And if the game interests you at all, then you can pick it up at alderon.games/store and you can check out the game for yourself.
Awesome.
And I assume you can also get there probably pathoftitans.com, and there's probably some side way to get to that purchase.
There's a store link straight on the main page of pathoftitans.com as well.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing all of your hard work.
Mm-hmm. And thanks for all the hard work.
Yeah. Like I said, it's just a dream of mine to be able to get this game released and people playing it and even though I'll never be able to really enjoy the game to its fullest extent as a video game because I developed the game and I'll be able to I remember when I did this and that. But if other players are able to experience that like really nice honeymoon period that you usually have with the games when you first open them up and you go, wow, this feels amazing. I feel like I'm really there. I feel like I really am a dinosaur. That's what I'm living for when it comes to this game. That's what I want to see. That's what I want people to experience. And I can't wait until we're finished and people are able to feel that, you know?
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks again, Jiggy, for taking the time to talk to us. That game sounds so great. I can't wait to do all of the things that we talked about. Microraptor definitely sounds like the winner if it ends up being the troll.
So now you've come around, because when we were first talking about it, you said, oh no, when I said I wanted to be Microraptor.
Yeah. Now it sounds really fun. When I figured out, I understood the gameplay about like the people you're playing with might just decide to eat you. I really like the idea of being something small that's not going to get eaten. There's no Ankylosaurus. There's an Ankylosaur, but it doesn't look quite as armored and, invulnerable as Ankylosaurus, which is what I like about it. And there's no sauropod that's big enough to be invulnerable either.
Right.
So you got to go with something tiny so that no one's going to bother to eat it.
Yeah. I also really like the idea of having events and challenges.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we might have to set up a server so that we can do some of these fun things. We'll have to see.
And now on to our dinosaur of the day, Zygomlosaurus, which was a request from Tyrant King via our Patreon and Discord. So thanks. Zygomlosaurus was a mamenchasaurid sauropod that lived in the Middle Jurassic in Zhejiang, Sichuan, China, and it was found in the Shashimiao Formation. It looks like a typical sauropod. It's large, on 4 legs, it's an herbivore, had a long neck.
Yeah, as a mamenchasaurid, of course, it had a ridiculously long neck, I'm sure.
Yeah, the authors who named it thought it looked a lot like Omeosaurus, and if that's the case, Omeosaurus, there's a few different species of Omeosaurus, but the one with the longest neck was about 30 feet or 9 meters long.
Oof. Yeah, that's a lot of neck.
So Zygomlosaurus was estimated to be about 50 feet or 15 meters long. Really quick, it is different from the dinosaur Zygomlosaurus, which is a basal sauropod that lived in the Middle Jurassic in what is now China. So they sound very similar.
Basically, the difference is there's a ZH instead of a G, but those sound kind of similar in Chinese. It's J versus G. So
I was thinking they're similar in that they're both sauropods that lived in the Middle Jurassic in what is now China. I don't think it's a mamenchasaurid, but apparently it did have a long neck. Anyway, back to the dinosaur of the day. The type species is Zygomlosaurus fuchiensis, and the genus name means Zygong lizard. It was named in 1976 by Ho, Zhao, and Chow, and it was based on specimen CV00261, and that includes a partial mandible, maxilla, and bone from the brain case area. There's other specimens that have been referred to Zygomlosaurus, at least 4 of them, and that also includes the dorsal vertebrae, pubis, and ischium. The authors, again, they thought it looked like Omeosaurus, but that the vertebrae was different enough to be its own genus. It had weak, bifurcated, or split neural spines on the vertebrae. There's debate over whether or not Zygomlosaurus is a valid genus. It has been synonymized with Omeosaurus and Mamenchisaurus.
Or at least it's been proposed separately, I guess.
Yes. It's kind of changed over the years. So in 1983, Dong, Zhou, and Zhang wrote a book, Dinosaurs from the Jurassic of Sichuan, and said that Zygomlosaurus fuchiensis was Omeosaurus fuchiensis. And in the book, they said that there were some time constraints around preparing and studying and putting Zagongosaurus on display so that not all the data could be analyzed, and that led to the material that was analyzed being named Zagongosaurus fuchiensis.
But books are not peer-reviewed, so that might not necessarily be the most valid way to do that.
Yes, but the way that one was written was like a scientific paper, so it's hard to tell.
Maybe there is a paper somewhere out there by the same authors or something.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to find that one. But anyway, so their analysis led them to reclassify Zagongosaurus as Omeasaurus. And that was also based on its stratigraphic position. It was in the same environment where other Omeasaurus had been found. Real quick, Omeasaurus was named in 1939 by Young and others, but the type specimen was fragmentary, and a lot of it was lost in transport during World War II. So Dongzhou and Zhang selected a neotype in 1983 when they also synonymized Zagongosaurus with Omeasaurus. Then in 1996, Zhang and Chen suggested that Zagongosaurus, now Omeasaurus, was actually Mamenchisaurus fuchiensis.
So they all agreed that it was different enough to be its own species.
Yep.
It was just an argument of whether it was different enough to deserve its own genus.
Yes. And they said that it came from a strata between where Omeasaurus and Mamenchisaurus had been found, but that to them it looked more like Mamenchisaurus. And then in 1997, Li and Tsai said that it was a Nomum nudum. And then in 1999, Valerie Martin Rowland found Zagongosaurus to be valid.
Wow.
But then in 2019, not that long ago, Wang and others found it to be undiagnostic.
So then sort of back to nomen nudum again.
Yep, sort of unclear.
It really bounces around a lot.
Yeah. And the paratype for Zagongosaurus fuchiensis was a maxilla. It had 3 teeth, and that one was thought to be possibly from a juvenile. Probably should have mentioned that earlier with the other specimens, but there you go.
Cool. So no matter what, we've got a decent number of these Mamenchisaurid bones. They got the typical really long neck. It's about 50 feet long. The question just is it Zagongosaurus? Is it a subspecies or species of Mamenchisaurus or a species of Omeasaurus? Or is it just not even a good enough find to name as anything specifically?
Yeah. Sounds like a case of need more fossils.
It does, yeah.
And now for our fun fact, because I took over the fun fact this week. Topiaries are cool.
That's your fun fact? If this is how you're taking over fun facts, I don't know if I'm going to let you take over fun facts anymore.
Okay, I've got more. And I'll tie it into dinosaurs. This came up because when I was looking up dinosaur news of the week, something popped up about the dinosaur topiaries in Santa Monica in LA and California in the US. We've talked about them before. They're on 3rd Street Promenade. Somehow I'd never seen them, even though I've been to LA a bunch. Maybe I haven't been to 3rd Street Promenade much. I don't remember. Anyway, somebody shared this close-up photo of the sauropod topiary, which was really cool. And I didn't realize that it's got steel and copper to help shape its face. And that led me to a mini dive or Eryctodromius burrow on topiaries. So I pulled a Garrett.
How so?
Because I saw a picture of a sauropod topiary and I thought, let me learn more about topiaries. So, topiaries have been around for a long time. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, not that long compared to dinosaurs, but still like a relatively long time. Apparently, ancient Romans had topiaries. It was also in China and Japan. There's this art of shaping shrubs and trees, and you can see it in gardens and also in the arts, like the Japanese bonsai, the small trees. Also, the Chinese punjing, where they form mini trees and plants and landscapes.
Those are considered topiaries?
Apparently.
Huh.
Yeah, I didn't realize either. And topiaries were revived in Europe in the 16th century. And those topiaries included animals and people, but they also did shapes like cones and pyramids. And then this trend seemed to die out in the 1700s, but then it came back again in the mid-1800s. And then in the late 1800s and early 1900s, it started to be more popular in America. And Walt Disney helped to start a new type of topiary. They call it the American portable style. And you can see that in the topiaries at Disneyland. They started making these in the 1960s. I think they're mostly around the It's a Small World ride. No dinosaurs.
Are they portable because they're in big pots or something?
It's because it's got this steel wire frame and the plants grow into them, and then the frame provides guidance for trimming. So I think before that, you just had to kind of shape it as you went.
Oh, interesting. So it's like a little more of a foolproof way to trim them.
Mm-hmm. So this led to mosaic culture with multiple types and styles of plants for your topiaries. And now, I mean, anybody can make a topiary. Apparently, the main thing is the type of plant you choose when you're making your own. And people recommend doing dense evergreens like boxwood. But it's also worth looking more into this if you decide to make your own topiary, or like a dinosaur topiary or something, because there's different varieties of plants that don't need to be trimmed as often. You might even be months between trimming.
I assume, depending on where you live, you might want to pick a plant that does well there as well.
Yes. And you don't need a frame. It can help, though, especially if you're a beginner. You want to use shears or pruners to shape, and then you take care of the plant the way you would with other plants, water them, all that stuff. And then keep an eye on your topiary. It's easier to trim when the branches are starting to grow out rather than when they get completely out of control. The more complex design you have, the more often you'll have to trim. And then if you're in a cold area, stop trimming about 2 months before the first frost to protect your plants from the cold.
Are you going to make a dinosaur topiary?
But it's not out of the realm of possibilities. It would probably be a small one if I did it.
Like a bonsai tree?
Yeah.
Shaped like a dinosaur somehow. Interesting.
I can tell Garrett prefers his fun facts.
That was much less sciencey than mine usually are, but that doesn't mean it's any less good.
Thanks. And that wraps up this episode of I Know Dino. Don't forget to subscribe to us in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss out on any new episodes. And join our community, patreon.com/IKnowDino. Thanks again, and until next time.